we are also going to go into the history of the earth because it is very important to our present situation. We cannot really understand how we got here if we don't know the process that led us to this point. So we'll spend a considerable length of time talking about what happened a long time ago. Then slowly we'll come forward until we get to what's going on today. It's all tied together. The same old thing has been going on a long time, and it's still going on. In fact, it has never stopped. Those of you who are predominantly right-brained may feel inclined to skip this left-brain material, yet it is most important for you to hang in there. It is through balance that spiritual health returns. When the left brain sees absolute unity, it begins to relax, and the corpus callosum, the band of fibers joining the two hemispheres, opens in a new way, allowing an integration between the two sides. The link between the left and the right brain widens, a flow starts, information is passed back and forth, and the opposing sides of the brain begin to integrate and synchronize with each other. If you re-hooked up for biofeedback, you can actually see this happening. This action turns on the pineal gland in a different manner and makes it possible for your meditation to activate the light body of the Merkaba. Then the whole process of regeneration and recovery of our previous higher levels of consciousness can proceed. It is a growth process. If you are studying any other spiritual practice, you do not need to stop in order to begin the work with the Merkaba, unless, of course, your teacher does not want to mix traditions. Other meditations that are based on truth can be extremely useful once the Merkaba is spinning, because then noticeable results can evolve very, very quickly. I will repeat myself just so you know for sure. The light body of the Merkaba does not contradict or inhibit any other meditation or religion that upholds the belief that there is only one God. So far, we've talked only about the ABCs of spirituality. These are just the beginning steps, but these first steps are the most important ones. I know. Your left brain may love all this information and file it away in neatly labeled pigeonholes. This is fine. Or you can just relax and read this like a adventure story, a mind stretcher, a fantasy. However you read it, the fact that you are reading this book is what matters, and you will receive whatever you're meant to receive. In the spirit of oneness, then, let us embark upon this journey of exploration together. Challenging the belief patterns of our parents. Many ideas we believe today and facts we've been taught in school are just not true, and people are now beginning to realize this worldwide. Of course, usually these patterns were believed to be true at the time they were taught, but then concepts and ideas changed, and the next generation was taught different truths. For example, the concept of the atom has changed dramatically so many times over the last 90 years that at this point they don't really adhere to a concept. They use one, but with the understanding that it may be wrong. At one time, the atom was thought to be like a watermelon, and the electrons were like seeds inside the watermelon. We really know very little about the reality that exists around us. Quantum physics has shown us that the person performing the experiment influences the outcome. In other words, consciousness can change the outcome of an experiment depending on its belief patterns. There are other aspects of ourselves we hold true that may not be true at all. One idea that has been held for a long time is that we're the only planet in existence with life on it. In our hearts of hearts, we know this is not true. But this planet will not admit this truth in modern times, even though there is powerful evidence of UFO sightings that have been coming from all over the world nonstop for over 50 years. Any subject other than UFOs would have been believed and accepted by the world had this subject not been so threatening. Therefore, we're going to look at evidence that suggests there is a higher consciousness in the universe, not only in the stars, but perhaps right here on the earth. As a side note, I suggest that you see 2 videos aired on NBC television as a special hosted by Charlton Heston, The Mysterious Origins of Man and the Mystery of the Sphinx. Both are distributed by BC Video at 1-800-508-0558. Gathering the anomalies. The Dogon T tribe and the Sirius B and Dolphin Beings tribe. This drawing is truly remarkable. The information in it came from a book about Sirius, The Sirius Mystery by Robert Temple. He had, I was told, between 10 and 12 different subjects to choose from, each one of which would lead to the same conclusion, but from a totally different point of view. I'm glad he chose the one he did, because it happens to relate to another aspect of what we will be talking about. Robert Temple was one of the first people to reveal certain facts, though scientists have known for a long time about an African tribe near Timbuktu called the Dogons. This tribe holds information that is simply impossible for them to have by any standards in our view of the world today. The information destroys everything we think we know about ourselves in regard to being alone. You see, the Dogons have a cave on their land that stretches way back into a mountain, and in this cave are wall drawings over 700 years old. One particular man, the holy man of their tribe, sits at the front of this cave to protect it. This is his lifetime job. They feed him and take care of him, but no one can touch him or get close to him. When he dies, another holy man takes his place. In this cave are amazing drawings and bits of information. I'm going to tell you about 2 of these bits, and these are only 2 of many. First of all, we're referring to the brightest star in the sky with an apparent magnitude of 1.4. Sirius, now called Sirius A, if you look at Orion's belt, those 3 stars in a row, and follow the line downward to your left, you see a very bright star, which is Sirius A. If you follow them upward, about twice the distance, you see the Pleiades. The information in the Dogon cave specifically showed another star rotating around Sirius. The Dogon are very specific about this star. They say it's very, very old and very small, and that it's made out of what they call the heaviest matter in the universe, which is close, but not actually correct. And they say that it takes close to 50 years for this small star to rotate around Sirius. This is detailed stuff. Astronomers were able to validate the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf, in 1862, and only about 15 or 20 years ago could they validate the other information. Now, stars are very much like people, as you will begin to see. They are alive, and they have personalities and many qualities like we have. On a scientific level, they have growth stages. They start out as a hydrogen suns like ours, where 2 hydrogen atoms come together in a fusion reaction to form helium. This process creates all the life and light that's on this planet. As a star further matures, another fusion process begins, the helium process, where 3 helium atoms come together to form carbon. This growth process continues through various stages until it gets all the way up through a particular level of the atomic table, at which point the star has reached the length of its lifespan. At the end of its life, as far as we know, there are 2 primary things a star can do. New data on pulsars and magnetars give other options. 1, it can explode and become a supernova, a huge hydrogen cloud that becomes the womb for hundreds of new baby stars. 2, it can rapidly expand into what's called a red giant, a huge explosion that engulfs all its planets, burns them up, and destroys the whole system, then stays expanded for a long time. Then slowly it will collapse into a tiny old star called a white dwarf. What the scientists found rotating around Sirius was a white dwarf, which corresponded exactly to what the Dogons say. Then science checked to see how much it weighed, to see if it really was the heaviest matter in the universe. The original computations made about 20 years ago determined that it weighed about 2,000 pounds per cubic inch. That would certainly qualify for heavy matter. But science now knows that this was an extremely conservative estimate. The newest estimate is approximately 1.5 million tons per cubic inch. Black holes aside, that would surely seem to be the heaviest matter in the universe. This means that if you had a cubic inch of this white dwarf, which is now called Sirius B, it would weigh about 1.5 million tons, which would go right through anything you set it on. It would head toward the center of the earth and actually oscillate back and forth across the core for a long time until friction finally stopped it in the very center. In addition, when they checked the rotational pattern of Sirius B around the larger Sirius A, they found it to be 50 years. 50.1 years. Now, that absolutely could not be a coincidence. It's just too close, too factual. Yet, how did an ancient primitive tribe know such detailed information about a star that could be measured only in this century? But that is only part of their information. They also knew about all the other planets in our solar system, including Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus, which we have discovered more recently. They knew exactly what these planets looked like when you approached them from space, which we have also only recently learned. They also knew about red and white blood cells and had all kinds of psychological information, physiological information about the human body that we've recently learned. All this from a primitive tribe. Naturally, a scientific team was sent over to ask the Dogons how they knew all this. Well, that was probably a big mistake for these researchers, because if they accepted that the Dogons really have this information, then by default they must accept how they got it. When they asked, "How did you learn this?" the Dogons replied that the drawings on the walls of their cave showed them. These drawings show a flying saucer. It looks just like that very familiar shape coming out of the sky and landing on 3 legs. Then it shows the beings in the ship making a big hole in the ground, filling it with water, jumping out of the ship into the water, and coming up to the edge of the water. These beings look very much like dolphins. In fact, maybe they were dolphins, but we don't know for certain. Then they started communicating to the Dogons. They described where they came from and gave the Dogon tribe all this information. That's what the Dogons said. The scientists just sat there. Eventually they said, "No, we didn't hear that," because it didn't fit into anything they thought they knew. They just kind of hid the information somewhere under a carpet in their minds. Most people, scientists included, just do not know what to do with these kind of facts. There has been a lot of information like this that we just don't know what to do with. Since we can't find a way to integrate this unusual information with what we already think we know, we just stick it away somewhere because the theories don't work. if we keep it. Here's another thing. The Dogons knew. This little drawing was on the walls, but the scientists didn't know what the heck it was until the computers calculated the orbits of Sirius A and Sirius B as seen from Earth. This pattern shown in the Dogon cave is identical to the pattern made by the Sirius B moving around Sirius A in a specific time frame, which happens to be from the year 1912 to the year 1990. The dolphins, or whoever these beings were, gave this present-day diagram time pattern to the Dogons at least 700 years ago. Now, as this has unfolded in my life, I've discovered that both 1912 and 1990 were very important years. In fact, the period between these 2 years was probably one of the most important periods ever in the history of the Earth. I'll explain more about this as we go on, but briefly, in 1912, time travel experiments began, as did experiments between the extraterrestrial greys and humans. We will explain later. And 1990 was the first year that the ascension grid for our planet was completed. And many other events happened during this period. The fact that the Dogon wall drawings pinpointed this period could be considered clearly prophetic. Atata trip to Peru and more Dogon evidence. I first came upon this Dogon information in 1982 or 83. I found myself around a group of people who were working with the Dogon tribe, who were actually going there and communicating with them. Then in 1985, I took a group of people to Peru, including one of these Dogon researchers. We checked into a plush hotel in Cuzco, called the Hotel San Agustin, intending to go walking the following day on the Inca Trail, about 40 miles over the mountaintops. You walk up to about 14,000 feet, then drop down to Machu Picchu, about 5,000 feet below. It's beautiful. Our hotel was a Spanish adobe palace hidden behind high walls in the center of town, and we were paired off so we could get cheaper rates. I was with the Dogon researcher, and he was constantly telling me about what they were learning, including a lot more than we're discussing here. We got a room, and the room number was 23. He got all excited and exclaimed, "Room 23, a very auspicious number. From Africa, where the Dogons live, the star Sirius disappears below the horizon and is out of sight for a couple of months. Then it appears again on the morning of July 23rd. When it rises about 1 minute before the sun, it appears bright ruby red just above the horizon, almost exactly due east. 60 seconds later, the sun emerges." So you can see Sirius for just a moment, then it's gone. This is called the Heliacal Rising of Sirius, which was a very important moment for most of the ancient world, not just for the Dogons and Egypt. This is the moment when Sirius and the sun and the earth are in a straight line across space. In Egypt, almost all the temples were aligned with this line, including the gaze of the Sphinx. Many of the temples had a tiny hole in the wall somewhere. Then there would be another tiny hole through another wall, then through another wall and another, going into some dim inner chamber. In that chamber, there would be something like a cube or golden mean rectangle of granite sitting in the middle of the room with a little mark on it. At the moment of the heliacal rising of Sirius, a ruby red light would strike the altar for a few seconds, which would begin their new year and the first day of the ancient Sothic calendar of Egypt. Anyway, here we were in Peru, getting the room and remarking about the number 23. We walked into the room and set our things down. Then we both looked at the bed, and on the bedspread we saw this image. We just stood there in amazement, looking at it for 5 minutes before we could even speak, because the wheels in our heads were going around so fast, trying to figure out how this could be. If you look again at the image of the beings who got out of the flying saucer, they looked very similar. They were half in and half out of the water, air-breathing mammals, and their tail fins were horizontal, not vertical, like fish. The only sea creatures with fins are cetaceans, such as dolphins and whales. But the Dogon image is from Africa, and here we were in Peru, staring at a very similar mammal. This just didn't compute. We asked the hotel personnel, "What do you know about this emblem?" They didn't know much. They were mostly of Spanish descent and weren't tied much into Indian legends. They didn't know the old stories of creation, so they had no idea what it meant. Here's a picture of the whole insignia. Figure 1-6. In order to find out more, we rented a little car and drove around the area, skiing other people. We finally ended up at Lake Titicaca, talking to some Uros Indians. At one point I asked, "What do you know about this?" They said, "Oh yeah," and proceeded to tell me a story that sounded very much like what the Dogons had told. This is their creation story. A flying saucer came out of the sky and landed in Lake Titicaca, and on the island of the sun, these dolphin-like creatures jumped into the water, came up to the people, told them where they came from, and in the beginning began an intimate relationship with the pre-Inca peoples. It was this connection with the sky people, according to the story, that launched the Incan Empire. I just sat there with my mouth open. Afterward, Simply Living magazine out of Australia published a whole series of articles on this subject. When people started investigating, they found that cultures all over the world have similar stories. There are 12 different cultures in the Mediterranean alone that tell a similar story. We'll come back to the dolphins a lot in this work because it seems they played a huge role in the unfoldment of consciousness on this planet. A Sanskrit poem. All Sanskrit sounds with their numerical values. Ka is equal to 0. Ka, ta, pa, ya equal to 1. Ka, tha, pa, ra equal to 2. Ga, da, ba, la equal to 3. Ga, da, ba, va equal to 4. Na, na, ma, sa equal to 5. Ka, ta, sa equal to 6. Cha, tha, sa equal to 7. Ja, da, ha equal to 9. Ja, da. Ja, da, ha equal to 8. Ja, da equal to 9. Gopi, Bhagya, Maghuvrata. O Lord Krishna, Surgusi Dadi Sadhiga, anointed with the yogurt of the milkmaid's worship. Kala Jivita Katava, O Savior of the fallen. Galahala Vasandhara, O Master of Shiva, please protect me. O Krishna, anointed with the yogurt of the milkmaid's worship. O Savior of the fallen. O Master of Shiva, please protect me. Let's look at something totally different now to suggest that the ancient beings of this world were perhaps more evolved than we give them credit for. The figure I just read, figure 1-7, is a phonetic translation of a Sanskrit poem. It was shown in an article published in Clarion Call magazine in the early 80s, I believe. The English translation is shown below the Sanskrit. Figure 1-7 from the Clarion Call magazine, Mathematics and the Spiritual Dimensions, by David Osborne. Over many years, researchers have discovered that each one of these Sanskrit sounds corresponds to a numerical value. It took them a long time to figure this out. Figure 1-8 shows all the various sounds that are possible in Sanskrit. Each sound has a numerical value from 0 to 9, and some syllables have 2 number values. For instance, ka, a primary sound, translates as spirit and corresponds to either 0 or 1, depending on its usage. I assume when researchers took these different sound values and applied them to this particular poem, a mathematical figure came up that is extremely significant. 0.314 15926535589, continuing out to 32 digits. This is the exact number of pi divided by 10 carried to 32 digits. No one has ever figured out how to calculate for the decimal point, which is why this pi over 10, if you move the decimal point one digit to the right, then it would be 3.1415, etc. The diameter of a circle divided into its circumference. Well, they might have known about the diameter of a circle divided into its circumference, but in our culture's understanding of who these ancients were, there is no possibility they could have calculated it with that kind of accuracy. Yet here it is, undeniable evidence. There are many, many of these poems and many, many other writings in Sanskrit. I don't know how far they've come in deciphering all of it, but I think that when all is said and done, it's going to be pretty remarkable. How did they do that? Who were these people? Really? Is it possible that our understanding of them is not exactly correct? Were they maybe a little more advanced than we thought? This poem definitely suggests this. How old is the Sphinx? The following is also probably one of the most important discoveries on the planet ever. It's happening right now at this moment. However, it began about 40 years ago with R.A. Schwanger de Lubens. He's a famous self-educated Egyptian archaeologist who has written many books. He and his stepdaughter, Lucy Lamy, have demonstrated a profound understanding of sacred geometry and the Egyptian culture. While observing the Sphinx, Schwaller de Lubitz became especially interested in the tremendous wear on its surface. Toward the back of the Sphinx, there are wear patterns that cut 12 feet deep into its surface. And this type of wear pattern is totally different from the patterns on the other buildings in Egypt. The wear patterns on other buildings supposedly built at the same time are textured by sand and wind, which is consistent if the buildings are, as believed, around 4,000 years old. But the wear patterns on the Sphinx look like they've been smoothed with water. According to mainstream thought, the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid, and other associated buildings were built about 4,500 years ago in the 4th dynasty under Cheops. When this discrepancy was brought up to the Egyptian archaeologists, they refused to listen. This went on for about 40 years. Other people noticed it, but the Egyptians simply would not admit the obvious. Then a man named John Anthony West became interested. He has written many books on Egypt, including Serpent in the Sky and a fine Egyptian guidebook. When he heard about the Sphinx dispute, he went to look for himself. He could see that the wear was incredibly excessive, and that it did look like water had caused the wear. He also found, like Schwaller, der Leibniz, that he could not get the credited archaeologists to listen to his beliefs about the Sphinx. There's a reason for his denial, I believe. Please understand, I'm not trying to discredit a major religion. I am merely reporting. You see, there are around 5,000 Egyptian archaeologists in the world, and they all pretty much agree with each other in most ways. This agreement has become a tradition. They make little changes, but not too many, and not too fast either. And most agree on the age of the pyramids. All of these archaeologists are Muslim, with a few exceptions, and their holy book is the Quran. The Quran, in its traditional interpretation, says that creation began about 6,000 years ago. So if a Muslim were to say that a building is 8,000 years old, he would be disputing their Bible. They cannot do that. They simply cannot. So they won't even talk about it, won't even discuss it. If you say that anything is more than 6,000 years old, they will not agree. They will do anything to protect their belief, making sure that no one knows about any man-made objects that might be more than 6,000 years old. For instance, they've enclosed the pyramids of the first dynasty, which are older than Saqqara, and build military fortifications around and within the walls so nobody can get to them. Why? Because they are older than or close to 6,000 years. So John Anthony West stepped outside the Egyptian archaeology world and brought in an American geologist named Robert Schoch, who did a computer analysis that gave a totally different scientific point of view. Lo and behold, beyond any doubt at all, the Sphinx does have water wear patterns, and in a desert that's at least 7,000 years old, it puts it well over the age of 6,000 years. On top of that, computers have calculated that it would take a minimum of 1,000 years of continuous torrential rains dumped on the Sphinx non-stop for 24 hours a day to cause that type of wear. This means the Sphinx has to be at least 8,000 years old minimum, because it's not likely that it bucketed rain non-stop for 1,000 years. They figured that it's got to be at least 10 to 15,000 years old, maybe a lot older. When this evidence gets out to the world, it will be one of the most powerful revelations on this planet in a very, very long time. It's going to have a bigger effect on the world's view of itself than probably any other discovery. This evidence has not entered into the schools or general knowledge yet, though it has gone all around the planet. It has been looked at and checked out and thought about and argued over, and in the end, most scientists have agreed that it cannot be doubted. So the age of the Sphinx has now been put back to at least 10,000 years, maybe 15,000 years, or a lot more. And it's already changing the entire worldview of the people on the cutting edge of archaeology. You see, judging by everything we presently think we know, the oldest civilized people in the world were the Sumerians, and they go back to approximately 3800 BC. Before that, conventional knowledge says there was nothing but hairy barbarians, no civilization at all, anywhere on the whole planet. But now we have something man-made and civilized that's 10,000 to 15,000 years old that changes everything. In the past, when something new like this is discovered, that has a major influence on the viewpoint of the world. It takes about 100 years for it to get to the people, for the average person to say, oh yes, that is true. But this time, it'll happen a lot quicker because of television, computers, internet, and the way things are today. Now, scientific circles, for the first time ever, are actually beginning to look at the words of Plato in a new light when he talked about another culture, another continent, from a dim past called Atlantis. The Sphinx is the largest sculpture on the planet. It was not done by hairy barbarians, but by a very sophisticated culture. And it was not done by anybody we know now, here on Earth. From a scientific point of view, this is the first solid evidence to be accepted about the true age of civilization. There has been lots of other evidence, but people just kept putting it under the table. This information on the Sphinx has made a crack in our worldview. This took place about 1990, and the crack is now widening, and now have accepted evidence that there absolutely had to have been someone on Earth who was highly civilized as early as 10,000 years ago. You can see how that's going to completely change our view of who we think we are. Edgar Cayce, the Sphinx, the Hall of Records. I find it extremely interesting that the Sphinx is causing this change, especially in view of what the R Association for Research and Enlightenment has been saying. The R, a foundation based on the teachings of the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, says that the Sphinx contains the opening to the Hall of Records. The Hall of Records is an alleged underground chamber containing physical proof of superior ancient civilizations on Earth. Cayce is a very interesting prophet. He made about 14,000 predictions in his lifetime. And by 1970, 12,000 of those predictions had come true, and 2,000 were still in the future. And in all those predictions, he made only one tiny mistake. Out of 12,000 predictions, that's incredible. You can almost forgive him for that one mistake. He received a letter from a man in France asking for a health reading, but Cayce mistakenly gave a reading on the Inquirer's twin brother. That was his only mistake. Every other thing came true, exactly as Cayce had predicted, up until 1972. However, after 1972, mistakes began to happen, and I'll explain why at the right time. And those who think Cayce's prediction that Atlantis would rise to the surface before 1970 did not come true, check out the January 1970 issue of Life magazine. Islands did come to the surface in the area where Casey said Atlantis was located. Some sank again.